I am Marcus, 32 years old, and I always believed family comes first. I sacrificed my Stanford scholarship to care for my mother after her accident, then worked 2 jobs to put my sister through college. But when I needed them most laid up after back surgery, they kicked me to the curb like yesterday's trash. 3 years later, they showed up at my door desperate for help after losing everything. What they did not expect was how one decisive action would change our relationship forever. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you will want to stick around to see how I flipped the script on those who threw me away. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, I had what most would consider a normal childhood, at least until I turned 14. Our modest 3-bedroom house was always filled with laughter, the smell of Mom's famous pot roast on Sundays, and endless conversations around our scratched oak dining table. Dad worked as an electrical engineer while Mom balanced part-time administrative work with taking care of Rachel and me. My sister Rachel was 3 years younger, a bright-eyed girl with boundless energy, who followed me everywhere, much to my teenage annoyance at the time. Everything changed on a cold November morning when Dad announced he was leaving. There was no dramatic fight, no tearful goodbye, just a suitcase by the door, and his emotionless voice saying he needed a fresh start. Mom stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, coffee cup trembling in her hand. Rachel clutched my arm, her small fingers digging into my skin, as Dad walked out without looking back. The door closed with a soft click that somehow echoed through the house for months afterward. The financial impact was immediate. Dad's sporadic child support payments barely covered the utilities. Mom took on 2 additional jobs, waitressing at a local diner during evenings and cleaning office buildings on weekends. The dark circles under her eyes deepened with each passing month, and her once cheerful demeanor faded into a hollow shell. Clinical depression followed, leaving her barely functional some days. There were mornings I would find her still in yesterday's clothes, staring blankly at the kitchen wall, unable to move until I gently guided her back to reality. During this time, I became Rachel's de facto parent. At 14, I learned to cook basic meals, help with her homework, and make excuses for Mom's absence at school events. Mom's working late again became my standard explanation while I sat through Rachel's elementary school performances alone, recording them on our old camcorder for Mom to watch during her more lucid moments. Despite these challenges, I excelled academically. School became my refuge, a place where equations had definitive answers and hard work yielded predictable results. My teachers noticed my aptitude for mathematics and science, encouraging me to apply for advanced programs. By senior year, I had the highest GPA in my class, captained the debate team, and completed enough advanced placement courses to enter college with sophomore standing. When the thick acceptance packet from Stanford arrived with a full academic scholarship, it felt like vindication for every late night spent studying, while the house remained quiet except for Mom's occasional sobs from her bedroom. The financial aid package would cover tuition, room, and board. My computer science professor had even connected me with a part-time internship opportunity in Palo Alto that would provide spending money. For the first time since Dad left, I allowed myself to dream of a future beyond our struggling household. 2 months before graduation, disaster struck again. Mom was working an overnight cleaning shift when she fell down a flight of stairs, breaking her hip and suffering a severe concussion. The accident left her immobile and unable to work. The medical bills arrived with alarming speed, their red past due stamps appearing before Mom even left the hospital. The timing could not have been worse. I needed to confirm my enrollment at Stanford within 2 weeks, but how could I leave when Mom couldn't even walk to the bathroom without assistance? Rachel at 15 was too young to become a caregiver. The weight of the decision pressed on me like a physical burden. The night before the Stanford deadline, I sat at our kitchen table surrounded by financial aid documents, medical bills, and the calendar marked with Mom's physical therapy appointments. Rachel came downstairs in her pajamas, eyes puffy from crying. "You have to go," she whispered, sitting across from me. "Mom will understand." But I knew better. There was no affordable home health care option. Our distant relatives had their own struggles, and Dad had remarried, starting a new family in Arizona with limited contact. The decision crystallized with painful clarity: Stanford would have to wait. The next day I declined the scholarship and enrolled at Chicago Community College. I took morning classes that allowed me to work afternoon shifts at a local bookstore and evening shifts stocking shelves at a grocery store. Between jobs, I helped Mom with physical therapy exercises and made sure Rachel stayed focused on her studies. Mom's recovery was gradual. For the first 6 months, her gratitude was palpable. She would hold my hand during her therapy sessions, tears in her eyes as she whispered, "I don't deserve you." Rachel, too, initially recognized the sacrifice, helping with household chores and studying diligently to honor my efforts. But human nature follows predictable patterns. As months stretched into years, gratitude faded into expectation. Mom's thank you became, "Could you also?" and Rachel's appreciation transformed into adolescent entitlement. By the time I had been attending community college part-time for 2 years, my sacrifice had become our baseline normal. There were moments that stung more than others, like when Mom questioned why I hadn't completed my associate's degree, yet seemingly forgetting that my delayed education was directly tied to working 2 jobs to support our household. Or when Rachel complained about not having the latest smartphone while I was wearing shoes with soles so thin I could feel every pebble through them. The one bright spot during this period was meeting Audrey. She worked at the campus bookstore, her quiet intelligence evident in how she could recommend the perfect book for any customer. We bonded over shared literary tastes and dreams deferred. When I explained my family situation during our 3rd coffee date, she didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, she simply said, "They're lucky to have you, but don't forget to have yourself too." Her words would echo in my mind years later when I needed them most. 3 years after declining Stanford, my life had fallen into a predictable rhythm. At 21, I had finally completed my associate's degree in business management, attending night classes while working full-time at a growing marketing firm. The entry-level position as a data analyst was not glamorous, but it offered health benefits that helped with Mom's ongoing medical needs and a modest salary that kept our household afloat. Mom's physical recovery had plateaued at about 80% of her previous mobility. She could handle most daily tasks, but claimed her hip pain prevented her from returning to full-time work. Instead, she took a part-time receptionist position at a dental office, contributing minimally to our household expenses while maintaining that her limited income was better than nothing. The real change came when Mom met Harold at a community center dance. 53 years old with salt and pepper hair and an easy laugh, Harold initially seemed like the positive influence Mom needed. Their whirlwind romance progressed rapidly, and within 4 months Harold had moved into our home without any discussion of how he would contribute to household expenses. The first red flags appeared subtly. Harold would make offhand comments about finally having someone take care of the house properly, while Mom scrambled to prepare elaborate meals he demanded. His promised job search stretched from next week to next month, to vague references about waiting for the right opportunity. Meanwhile, our utility bills increased with his endless television watching and long hot showers, yet his financial contributions remained non-existent. When I gently questioned Mom about the arrangement, her defensive response revealed how desperate she was to maintain this relationship. "Harold provides emotional support I've been missing for years," she insisted, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "Not everything is about money, Marcus." Rachel, now 18, and in her senior year of high school, was thriving academically despite the household tension. Her excellent grades and impressive extracurricular activities resulted in acceptance letters from several universities, including Northwestern, an expensive private institution with prestigious programs but limited financial aid. The acceptance packet arrived on a rainy April afternoon. Rachel burst through the door, waving the letter and shrieking with excitement. Mom and Harold gathered around the kitchen table as Rachel detailed the opportunities Northwestern would provide. No one mentioned the cost until I reluctantly brought up the tuition figure, $42,000 per year before room and board. An uncomfortable silence followed until Harold cleared his throat. "Well, Marcus has been saving for years. Surely he can help his sister achieve her dreams." The presumption in his tone made my stomach clench, but before I could respond, Mom chimed in. "We all know Northwestern will open doors Rachel deserves. You wouldn't want to hold your sister back, would you?" That same week, my boss, Frank, called me into his office. A stocky man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Frank had noticed my work ethic and analytical skills. "We're launching a management training program," he explained, sliding a brochure across his desk. 2 years of intensive training, significant pay increase, and a clear path to senior management. I've recommended you, but it requires full-time commitment, plus some evenings and weekends. The opportunity was everything I had been working toward, a chance to transform my job into a genuine career with advancement potential. The increased salary would eventually allow me to resume my bachelor's degree studies and perhaps even save for a modest home of my own. That night I sat alone at a 24-hour diner calculating numbers on napkins as I weighed my options. The management program would require me to quit my second job, creating an immediate financial shortfall. Rachel's tuition would strain our finances beyond what Mom and Harold could contribute, even if Harold finally found employment. When I returned home past midnight, I found Rachel sitting on the porch swing waiting for me. Her eyes were puffy from crying. "Mom told me about your job opportunity," she said quietly. "She also said we can't afford Northwestern without your help." I sat beside her, the swing creaking under our combined weight. "I'm trying to figure out a solution," I said truthfully. Rachel turned to face me, her expression, a mixture of hope and calculation that reminded me uncomfortably of Harold. "You've always been the smart one, Marcus. I'm just asking for 4 years to get my education. You can restart your career anytime." The manipulation was obvious, yet effective. The childhood closeness Rachel invoked strategically still held power over my decision-making. 2 days later, I declined the management program, explaining to a disappointed Frank that family obligations prevented me from accepting. I kept my second job stocking grocery shelves from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m., my hands cracking and bleeding in the winter months from the constant cold and repetitive motions. Rachel left for Northwestern that fall, settling into her dormitory with new bedding and electronics purchased with my credit card at Harold's insistence that she needs to make a good impression. The promised weekly calls home quickly dwindled to monthly texts, asking for additional money for books, organizational dues, or unexpected expenses. Audrey, now my girlfriend of 2 years, watched this dynamic with increasing concern. During a rare dinner out to celebrate her promotion at the university library, she gently broached the subject. "You look exhausted," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "This arrangement isn't sustainable, and your family doesn't seem to recognize what you're sacrificing." "It's temporary," I insisted, pulling my hand away. "Once Rachel graduates, things will change." Audrey's expression softened with something between pity and frustration. "Will they? Or will there be another crisis, another reason you need to put yourself last?" Her question created the first serious rift in our relationship. I interpreted her concern as an attack on my family loyalty, while she saw it as care for my well-being. The tension lingered between us for weeks, creating a distance neither of us knew how to bridge. The first major disappointment came on my 22nd birthday. Rachel had promised to come home for the weekend, and Mom had planned a small celebration. I had even requested the night off from my second job, a rare occurrence that cost me needed income. The afternoon of my birthday, Rachel texted that a sorority event had come up and she couldn't make it home after all. The cake Mom had ordered sat mostly uneaten, as Harold complained about the waste of money. Later that night, scrolling through social media, I saw photos of Rachel at a lakefront party, red cup in hand, tagged from earlier that same day. The emergency sorority event was clearly a fabrication. When I called her, she answered with obvious ambient noise in the background. "It's just a stupid birthday, Marcus," she slurred over the music. "You'll have another one next year." I ended the call without responding, a hollow feeling expanding in my chest as I realized how our relationship had transformed. The little sister who once followed me everywhere now couldn't spare a weekend for the brother who worked bleeding hands to fund her education. 5 years of sacrificing career advancement for family obligations had left me in a precarious position. At 26, I remained in the same data analyst role while watching younger colleagues advance to senior positions. My resume showed stability, but lacked the progressive responsibility that would attract higher-level opportunities. The second job at the grocery store had become a fixture in my life, the manager now treating me like permanent staff rather than a temporary worker. Frank had remained supportive, despite my declining the management training program, occasionally offering projects that would enhance my skills, without requiring the full-time commitment I couldn't manage. We had developed a friendship beyond the workplace, occasionally meeting for coffee, where he would share industry insights and gently encourage me to reconsider my priorities. During one such meeting, Frank's expression was different, excited, rather than concerned. "I'm leaving the firm," he announced, stirring his coffee with unusual energy. "Starting my own marketing analytics, consultancy focusing on small businesses. The market research shows a huge gap in affordable data services for companies too small for the big agencies, but too complex for generic solutions." I congratulated him, sincerely admiring his entrepreneurial courage, while feeling a twinge of envy at his freedom to pursue such opportunities. "Here's the thing," Frank continued, leaning forward. "I need a partner who understands both the technical side and client management, someone I trust implicitly." He slid a business plan across the table. This would be 50-50 ownership. Equal risk, equal reward. The proposal was meticulously detailed, projecting modest first-year operations with significant growth potential by year 3. The client acquisition strategy leveraged Frank's extensive industry contacts, while the service model would utilize my technical expertise to create scalable analytics solutions. "The catch is we each need $25,000 as startup capital," Frank explained. "I've got my portion saved. Can you manage the investment within 2 months?" My heart raced at the opportunity. I had about $7,000 in savings, pitifully little for someone who had been working full-time for years, but constant family expenses had prevented significant accumulation. With aggressive saving, and possibly selling my aging car for a cheaper model, I might reach $15,000. The remaining $10,000 would be challenging but potentially manageable with a personal loan. "I need to run some numbers," I replied cautiously, "but I want this, Frank. I really do." The next 2 months became a mission. I took on additional shifts at the grocery store, sold my modest collection of first edition books, and eliminated every non-essential expense. I brought lunch to work, canceled my streaming subscriptions, and even moved to a cheaper apartment with a longer commute, but significantly lower rent. By limiting myself to 4 hours of sleep most nights, I managed to accumulate nearly $18,000, still short but close enough that Frank might consider extending the deadline. During this period of intense focus, Rachel graduated from Northwestern with honors in communications. The graduation ceremony was a surreal experience as I sat between Mom and Harold, listening to speeches about achievement and future potential. When Rachel crossed the stage, Harold whooped loudly, turning to me with a grin. "Worth every penny, right?" Those pennies had cost me thousands of nights of lost sleep, advancement opportunities, and physical well-being, but I smiled tightly and nodded. This was supposed to be the end of my major financial support. Rachel was educated and employable, ready to build her independent life. I allowed myself to hope that my financial situation might finally improve. That hope evaporated one Sunday dinner, when Rachel announced her engagement to Timothy, a business major she had met during senior year. I offered sincere congratulations, genuinely happy that she had found partnership. The conversation quickly turned to wedding plans, with Rachel describing a destination ceremony in Napa Valley with at least 100 guests. "The venue deposit alone is $12,000, she explained, scrolling through photos on her tablet. "But it's absolutely perfect." Mom nodded enthusiastically while Harold refilled his wine glass. "So when are you thinking of putting down the deposit?" he asked, looking directly at me. The assumption that I would fund Rachel's wedding hit me like a physical blow. "I'm not sure I can help much with wedding expenses," I said carefully. "I'm actually saving for a business opportunity." "A business opportunity?" Mom interrupted, her tone suggesting I had announced plans to join a cult. "What kind of opportunity?" I explained Frank's proposal with growing enthusiasm, describing the market research and growth projections. As I spoke, I noticed the family exchanging glances, their expressions shifting from confusion to dismissal. "That sounds nice, honey," Mom said, when I finished, her condescending tone making clear she had already dismissed the idea. "But Rachel's wedding is a priority right now. You know how important family milestones are." "Seems risky," Harold added, though he had never held a job during the entire 5 years I had known him. "Most small businesses fail. Rachel's wedding is a sure thing, an investment in happiness." Rachel reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I've dreamed about this day since I was little, Marcus. I need you to help make it perfect." her eyes filled with calculated tears. "You're my big brother. Who else would I turn to?" The emotional manipulation was obvious yet effective. The dinner ended with me reluctantly agreeing to see what I can do about wedding expenses. Later that night, I called Frank to explain my situation. "I need more time," I admitted, pacing my small apartment. Family obligations came up. Frank's silence spoke volumes before he finally responded. "Marcus, I value you enough to extend the deadline to 4 months. But this is a hard limit I need to move forward with or without you by then." That conversation should have been my wake-up call. Instead, I found myself withdrawing $20,000 from my business fund for Rachel's wedding expenses. The photographer, flowers, and her dream dress all came with price tags that made me wince, but that I paid without complaint. Each check written felt like signing away another piece of my future. The wedding day arrived with picture-perfect weather. Rachel looked beautiful. The vineyard setting was stunning, and guests raved about the gourmet food, all funded primarily through my sacrifice. I gave a heartfelt toast as brother of the bride, celebrating Rachel's accomplishments and happiness. The acknowledgement of my contribution was conspicuously absent from all speeches. Rachel thanked her parents for their unwavering support, while Harold basked in congratulations for raising such a wonderful daughter despite having entered our lives when Rachel was already a teenager. The final indignity came during the reception when I overheard Rachel speaking with her college friends near the bathroom. "Yeah, Marcus is still in that same boring job," she said with a laugh. "Lives in this tiny apartment in a terrible neighborhood. I keep telling him to get his life together." Another voice chimed in. "And that sad little car he drives. Did you see it in the parking lot?" "I know," Rachel replied. "It's like at some point you have to grow up, right? Not everyone gets to have the college experience, but that doesn't mean you have to just give up on having a decent life." I stepped back into the shadows, the realization hitting me with crushing force. My sister had no understanding of why I drove that sad little car or lived in that tiny apartment. The connection between her opportunities and my sacrifices had been completely lost on her. In her narrative, my limited circumstances reflected personal failure rather than the direct result of prioritizing her needs above my own. That night, I called Frank from my hotel room and told him I would need the full 4 months to gather the investment. He agreed with a warmth that made clear he understood more than I had verbalized. "Some lessons are expensive, Marcus," he said quietly. "Just make sure you're learning from them." 2 years after Rachel's wedding, my life had found a new equilibrium. At 28, I had missed Frank's partnership opportunity, but he had hired me as a senior consultant at his now thriving firm. The position offered better compensation than my previous job, allowing me to rebuild my savings while reducing my hours at the grocery store to weekends only. My relationship with Audrey had deepened our earlier tensions, resolved through honest communication about boundaries and priorities. Rachel and Timothy had purchased a suburban home with help from his parents, while Mom and Harold continued living in the house where I had grown up. Our family dynamics had settled into a pattern of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, where conversation remained superficial and past sacrifices went unmentioned. The physical toll of years working 2 jobs began to manifest in increasingly severe back pain. What started as occasional discomfort after long shifts evolved into constant radiating pain down my right leg. Over-the-counter painkillers became ineffective, and my posture noticeably changed as I unconsciously adapted to minimize discomfort. Audrey finally insisted I see a specialist after finding me on the bathroom floor one morning, unable to stand upright. The MRI results were conclusive: a severely herniated disc between L4 and L5 vertebrae, with significant nerve compression. The neurosurgeon was blunt in his assessment. "This injury is the result of cumulative stress years of physical labor and poor ergonomics," he explained, pointing to the scan. "Without surgical intervention, you risk permanent nerve damage and chronic disability." The recommended microdiscectomy procedure was straightforward, but required a 6-week recovery period during which I would be unable to work my physically demanding second job. Physical therapy would extend for months afterward, with appointments 3 times weekly during the initial rehabilitation phase. The timing could not have been worse financially. I had just put a deposit down on an engagement ring for Audrey, planning to propose on our upcoming anniversary. My health insurance would cover most of the surgical expenses, but the lost income from my second job would make it impossible to cover both living expenses and the specialized physical therapy not fully covered by insurance. For the first time since my mother's accident 13 years earlier, I found myself needing family support. I arranged a family dinner to explain my situation, rehearsing how to ask for temporary financial assistance without sounding desperate. I needed approximately $2,000 monthly for 3 months, a substantial amount, but split between Mom Harold and Rachel, a manageable temporary burden. The dinner began pleasantly enough, with Rachel sharing anecdotes about Timothy's recent promotion, and Mom showing photos from a weekend trip to Michigan that Harold had splurged on for their anniversary. When the meal ended, I carefully explained my medical situation, the upcoming surgery, and my temporary financial shortfall. The silence that followed my explanation stretched uncomfortably until Harold cleared his throat. "That's certainly unfortunate timing," he said, his tone suggesting skepticism rather than sympathy. "Though I've always wondered why a young man needs 2 jobs in this economy." "What Harold means, Mom," interjected with a tight smile, "is that perhaps this is an opportunity to reassess your priorities. You could move back home during your recovery. We still have your old room." The suggestion was presented as generosity, but the underlying message was clear. Financial help would come with strings attached, namely, returning to their control. At 28, the prospect of moving back to my childhood bedroom under Harold's constant criticism was unthinkable. "I appreciate the offer," I replied carefully, "but my apartment is closer to the physical therapy center, and Audrey can help with transportation. I'm just looking for temporary financial assistance until I can return to full-time work." Rachel exchanged glances with Mom before speaking. "We're really tight right now with the new house payment," she said. "And honestly, Marcus' back problems are pretty common. My friend had similar symptoms, and just did yoga instead of surgery. Have you considered less extreme options?" The implication that I was exaggerating my condition or seeking unnecessary treatment stung sharply. I wordlessly pulled up the MRI images on my phone and placed it on the table. "The neurosurgeon says, without surgery, I risk permanent nerve damage," I stated flatly. Harold barely glanced at the medical evidence. "In my day, people worked through pain," he announced. "This younger generation runs to doctors for every little ache." The conversation deteriorated further, as my request for help was reframed as irresponsibility on my part. Mom suggested I should have planned better for medical emergencies, while Rachel wondered aloud why Audrey couldn't cover things temporarily, showing complete disregard for the fact that Audrey worked as a librarian with modest income herself. The final blow came when Harold mentioned a joint family emergency account I had established years earlier when Mom was still recovering from her accident. I had continued contributing small amounts monthly, believing it would provide security for genuine family emergencies. "Why not use the family emergency fund?" I asked, grasping at this potential solution. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Mom suddenly became very interested in rearranging her silverware, while Rachel studied her wineglass. "That account was depleted last year," Harold finally admitted without meeting my eyes. "Depleted? For what emergency?" I asked, confusion turning to dread. Rachel cleared her throat. "Timothy and I had an opportunity to upgrade our honeymoon package to include a private villa." Mom thought, since it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. The realization that my family had used our emergency fund for my sister's luxury honeymoon upgrade while I worked 2 jobs brought a clarity that had eluded me for years. This was not a family that would support me in crisis. It was a one-way relationship that had persisted only through my willingness to keep giving. "I see," I said quietly, rising from the table. "Thank you for your honesty." The argument that followed was brief but devastating. When I expressed feeling betrayed by their use of the emergency fund, Harold became defensive, calling me selfish for questioning family decisions. Mom tearfully insisted they had always supported me emotionally, as though encouragement were equivalent to the decade of financial sacrifice I had made. Rachel claimed I was creating drama over money that would have just sat in that account anyway. The evening ended with an ultimatum from Harold. "If you can't appreciate what this family has done for you, and you're going to complain about money, perhaps you should handle your problems on your own." I left their house that night with the crushing realization that I had built my life around a family mythology that existed only in my mind. The belief that my sacrifices were recognized and would be reciprocated had been a comforting fiction. The week of my surgery, I reached out once more via group text, simply sharing the date of the procedure and my expected discharge time. No response came. After awakening groggy from anesthesia, my phone showed 0 messages from family members. Only Audrey was there, holding my hand and navigating discharge instructions with the nurse. Recovery proved more difficult than anticipated. Post-surgical pain combined with limited mobility made basic tasks challenging. When I returned to my apartment, an eviction notice was taped to the door. My reduced hours had left me, unable to make rent for 2 consecutive months, and my landlord's patience had expired. In desperation, I called Mom, reaching her voicemail. Hours later, a text arrived from Rachel. "Sorry to hear about your housing situation. Maybe this will teach you some financial responsibility. Let us know when you're back on your feet." The night I was physically removed from my apartment remains the lowest point of my life. The property manager showed minimal sympathy for my medical condition as I shuffled belongings into trash bags, pain medication, barely dulling the surgical sites throbbing. Audrey helped as much as she could, but her studio apartment couldn't accommodate my furniture or most possessions. That night I slept in my car despite the doctor's orders to maintain proper spinal alignment. The surgical incision burned against the cramped back seat as I tried to find a position that didn't send shooting pain down my leg. The contrast between this moment and the luxury villa my emergency fund had provided for Rachel's honeymoon kept me awake despite exhaustion. Morning brought the humbling experience of washing in a gas station bathroom before my physical therapy appointment. The therapist noticed my disheveled appearance but kindly focused on treatment rather than questions. Afterward, with nowhere to go and unable to drive comfortably, I parked behind an abandoned strip mall and reclined the seat as much as possible, trying to rest while rain drummed against the windshield. In that moment of absolute rock bottom, staring at the water streaming down my windshield, I finally accepted the truth I had been avoiding for years. My family saw me not as a person worthy of reciprocal care, but as a resource to be extracted from until depletion. The recognition was both devastating and strangely liberating. If I had nothing left to give them, perhaps I could finally focus on rebuilding myself. The third night of sleeping in my car, pain medication wearing off and rain seeping through a window, I couldn't fully close my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Assuming it was a debt collector, another looming crisis, I almost didn't answer. When I did, the voice on the other end was unexpected. "Marcus, it's Walter, from your mom's church choir." The older man's voice was tentative. "Your physical therapist, Barbara, is my niece. She was concerned about your situation and remembered the connection." Walter had been a peripheral figure in our family life for years, a kind widower who occasionally joined us for holiday meals. We had never been close, but he had always treated me with genuine warmth during our limited interactions. "I understand you're going through a rough patch," Walter continued when I didn't immediately respond. "I have a finished basement apartment sitting empty. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean, has a private entrance, and the rent would be minimal." My pride wanted to refuse, but reality overrode that impulse. "I appreciate the offer," I said, voice cracking slightly, "but my current income is unreliable due to recovery limitations." "We can work something out," Walter replied gently. "Perhaps help with yard maintenance when you're physically able. For now, you need proper rest to heal." The basement apartment proved to be a lifeline, modest but clean, with a separate bedroom, small kitchenette, and most importantly, a real bed where I could properly align my healing spine. Walter refused payment for the first 2 months, insisting my focus should be recovery. His kindness, extended without expectation of return, contrasted sharply with my family's conditional support. Audrey visited daily, bringing home-cooked meals and unwavering encouragement. When I expressed shame at my circumstances, she took my face in her hands and spoke with fierce conviction. "This situation is temporary. Your character is not defined by a medical crisis or family who failed to recognize your worth." The weeks of physical therapy gradually improved my mobility, though progress was slower than I had hoped. By week 4, I could walk without assistance for short periods. At week 6, my follow-up appointment showed proper healing, though the surgeon emphasized continued caution with physical activity. Throughout this period, not once did my family contact me directly. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned they had constructed a narrative where I had overreacted to reasonable boundaries and was now punishing them with silence. This revision of reality might have once prompted me to reach out and mend fences. Instead, I focused my limited energy on recovery and rebuilding. When I was finally cleared for part-time work, a surprising email arrived from Frank. "Heard through the grapevine about your situation," he wrote. "When you're ready to talk, I have a proposition that might interest you." Our meeting took place at a quiet cafe near Walter's home. Frank had aged slightly in the years since his initial partnership, offer a few more gray hairs lines around his eyes, but his energy remained infectious. "My company has grown faster than projected," he explained after inquiring about my recovery. "The client base has expanded, but we're turning away small businesses that could benefit from our services because the standard package is beyond their budget." He slid a folder across the table containing a business proposal. "I want to create a subsidiary focusing exclusively on small business analytics, streamlined services at accessible price points. I need someone who understands both the technical aspects and the human side of small business operations." The proposal outlined a partnership structure with Frank's main company, providing initial funding and infrastructure while I would build and lead the new division. Most surprisingly, it required no financial investment from me. "Instead of capital, I'm asking for sweat equity," Frank explained. "You'll earn ownership percentages based on performance benchmarks. The compensation starts modestly, but increases with division profitability." The opportunity seemed too perfect, prompting my skepticism. Why me, especially now when I'm not exactly at my professional best? Frank's response was measured. "Because you understand sacrifice and persistence. You've demonstrated loyalty sometimes to a fault and ethical decision-making under pressure. Those qualities are harder to find than technical skills." He paused before adding, "And maybe I'm making up for not fighting harder to keep you in that management program years ago." The following months transformed my life's trajectory. Working initially from Walter's basement, I developed streamlined analytics packages tailored to small businesses with limited budgets. My personal experience with financial constraints helped me identify essential services that provided maximum value for minimal investment. The division launched with 3 test clients: a family-owned restaurant, a local bookstore, and a startup landscaping company. The results exceeded expectations, with all 3 reporting significant operational improvements within the first quarter. Word spread through small business networks, bringing a steady stream of new clients. By the end of the first year, what began as a subsidiary had evolved into a thriving operation with its own small staff. My physical recovery had progressed to near-complete rehabilitation, though occasional pain remained a reminder of past strain. The financial stability allowed me to finally stop working second jobs, focusing entirely on building the business. 3 years passed in a blur of professional growth and personal healing. At 31, I had become a respected name in small business analytics, frequently invited to speak at entrepreneurship conferences. The company continued expanding, eventually requiring larger office space and additional staff. My ownership stake, grown through performance benchmarks, provided income that finally reflected my capabilities and effort. This stability allowed me to purchase my first home, a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, with a yard large enough for the dog Audrey had always wanted. On a crisp autumn evening in that backyard, surrounded by string lights and her favorite flowers, I finally proposed with the ring I had saved for years earlier. Her tearful yes marked another step in building the life I had deferred for so long. Throughout this period of transformation, I maintained my distance from biological family. The absence of their demands and criticism created space for developing healthier relationships. Walter became a father figure whose wisdom and unconditional support helped heal old wounds. Frank and his wife included us in holiday gatherings, demonstrating how family connections could exist without exploitation. Most importantly, Audrey and I created our own traditions and support systems. We hosted Sunday dinners for friends, celebrated milestones with genuine joy for each other's accomplishments, and practiced communication that acknowledged rather than dismissed emotional needs. This chosen family showed me what reciprocal care looked like, how relationships could lift rather than deplete. Professional therapy also played a crucial role in my healing process. Weekly sessions helped identify patterns of enabling behavior and unhealthy guilt that had allowed my family's exploitation to continue for years. I learned to recognize manipulation tactics and practice setting boundaries in hypothetical scenarios before facing real-world tests. Family loyalty is admirable, my therapist often reminded me, but not when it becomes self-destruction. Healthy love wants the best for everyone involved, not sacrifice from one for the comfort of others. The business continued, thriving, expanding into new markets with innovative approaches to data analytics. My team grew to include bright young analysts whose enthusiasm reminded me of my own early career aspirations. I instituted policies ensuring work-life balance, remembering too well the physical toll of overextension. Our approach gained industry recognition, leading to a feature in a prominent business publication that highlighted our unique model of making sophisticated analytics accessible to small enterprises. The article included my photograph and a brief biography mentioning my rise from data analyst to company executive. This public recognition would eventually bridge the 3-year silence with my biological family, though not in the way I might have anticipated. The article's publication set in motion events that would test my newly established boundaries and self-worth in ways I couldn't have predicted. The family that had once discarded me would soon return not with recognition of past wrongs but with hands outstretched for what they believed they were owed. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon as I reviewed quarterly projections with my finance team. Seeing Mom on the caller ID after 3 years of silence sent an immediate surge of adrenaline through my system. I excused myself from the meeting, stepped into my private office, and answered with professional detachment. Marcus' mom's voice sounded smaller than I remembered, with a tremor that suggested either age or distress. "It's been so long. We saw your article in the business magazine." The conversation that followed revealed the real purpose behind reconnecting. Harold had developed a gambling problem that had remained hidden until catastrophic financial consequences emerged. Their house, my childhood home, had been mortgaged without Mom's knowledge to cover gambling debts. Foreclosure proceedings had begun, leaving them facing imminent homelessness. "We've been staying with Rachel and Timothy for the past month," Mom explained, her voice breaking. "But their place is too small for 4 adults. Rachel's marriage is suffering. We need help, Marcus." The specific request became clear. As the conversation continued, Mom and Harold wanted to move into my big empty house until they could get back on their feet. There was no acknowledgement of our 3-year estrangement, no mention of how they had abandoned me during my medical crisis. In Mom's narrative, we had simply lost touch due to busy lives. Rather than immediately refusing or agreeing, I suggested meeting in person. "There's a restaurant halfway between our locations," I said, maintaining emotional distance. "We can talk there tomorrow evening at 7. Audrey's reaction to this development mixed concern with caution. "You've worked hard to establish healthy boundaries," she reminded me as we discussed the situation that night. "Whatever you decide, make sure it reflects your values now, not obligation to the past." The restaurant I selected was upscale enough to discourage emotional outbursts, but casual enough for comfortable conversation. I arrived early, securing a corner table that offered privacy while allowing me to observe their arrival. Audrey had offered to accompany me, but this was a conversation I needed to navigate alone. When they entered the restaurant, I barely recognized my family. Mom had aged visibly, her once meticulous appearance now marked by poorly colored gray roots and clothing that hadn't been properly ironed. Harold's confident swagger had diminished to a defensive hunch, his eyes darting around as though creditors might emerge from behind potted plants. Rachel appeared exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes, while Timothy's tight expression suggested ongoing marital tension. Marcus' mom breathed upon reaching the table, moving to embrace me. I stood and offered a handshake, instead establishing physical boundaries from the outset. The momentary hurt in her eyes was followed by understanding as they took their seats. "You look well," Rachel offered awkwardly. "Success agrees with you." "Thank you," I replied, maintaining neutral politeness. "I appreciate you all meeting me here." The initial conversation remained superficial comments about the restaurant's decor, the weather-safe topics that delayed addressing the elephant in the room. When the appetizers arrived, Harold finally broached their situation directly. I'm sure Diana explained our temporary setback. He began using Mom's first name as though creating distance from responsibility. The economy's been tough on everyone. The economy didn't forge Mom's signature on mortgage documents, Rachel interjected, with unexpected sharpness, suggesting family divisions beyond what Mom had described. Harold's face flushed. That's being addressed through counseling. The important thing now is finding suitable housing until our situation stabilizes. The conversation quickly revealed their complete plan. Harold and Mom would take the master bedroom of my home to preserve their dignity while I would move to a smaller bedroom. They would need transportation to various appointments since they had sold their car. Mom would handle household management, meaning she would make decisions about meals, decor, and daily schedules. They anticipated staying just until Harold's job search succeeded, though no concrete timeline was offered. Your house has that extra office space that's barely used. Rachel added her tone, suggesting she had visited my home, which she hadn't. Harold could set up his job search headquarters there. As they outlined their expectations, I observed their interactions with clinical detachment. Mom alternated between appealing to my emotions, family is all we really have, and subtle guilt tactics. After everything we did for you growing up, Harold contributed minimal accountability for his actions while making presumptuous comments about reorganizing my home office to accommodate his needs. Rachel primarily focused on how my assistance would relieve her household stress, rather than addressing my welfare. The most manipulative moment came when Rachel casually mentioned her pregnancy information, clearly intended to leverage emotional connection to a future niece or nephew as motivation for my compliance. We'd hoped to share the news under better circumstances, she said, hands protectively covering her still flat stomach. The baby deserves a stable environment, not a house filled with tension over grandparents sleeping on our sofa. Throughout their presentation, not once did anyone acknowledge our estrangement or the circumstances that created it. The past was strategically erased, replaced with a fictional narrative where I was the naturally designated safety net for family crises. The emotional dynamics remained unchanged. Despite our years apart, I was expected to prioritize their needs above my own considerations. After they had exhausted their prepared appeals, Harold leaned forward with an expression of entitled expectation. So when can we move in? This weekend would be ideal since the motel costs are draining what little savings we have left. The entitlement in his tone was jarring, particularly coming from someone who had once told me to handle your problems on your own when I faced homelessness after surgery. More shocking was his next statement, delivered with complete lack of self-awareness. After all we've done for you, this is the least you can do. Family takes care of family, that's what you always believed, right? Those words, echoing the manipulative tactics that had shaped our relationship for decades, crystallized my response. The family across the table mistook my thoughtful silence for agreement, exchanging relieved glances as they began discussing logistics for moving into my home. Harold, you'll need to fix that squeaky step at Marcus's place, Mom said already, planning modifications to my property. And I should review his kitchen setup to see what we need to bring. Their presumption created perfect clarity. This wasn't a family seeking reconciliation or offering amends, it was the same dynamic with new circumstances. The only difference was that I was no longer the same person who had accepted such treatment. The sound of silverware against plates filled the momentary silence as I considered my response. Years earlier, I might have simply acquiesced to maintain peace or surrendered to guilt about abandoning family in crisis. The Marcus who had slept in his car after surgery, abandoned by these same people, had learned painful but necessary lessons about boundaries and self-respect. I've listened carefully to your situation. I began, my voice calm and measured, and I've heard your proposed solution. Now I'd like to offer an alternative. Their expressions shifted from expectant to confused as I removed a folder from my briefcase and placed it on the table. Inside was a comprehensive financial recovery plan I had prepared after Mom's initial call, not from obligation but from a place of compassion tempered by wisdom. This folder contained several resources, I explained, opening it to reveal neatly organized documents. First, information about 3 affordable housing options within your budget, including a senior living community with financial assistance programs. Second, contact information for a reputable credit counselor who specializes in gambling recovery cases. Third, a reference to a family therapist who can help address the underlying dynamics that contributed to this situation. Harold's face darkened with recognition that I wasn't offering our home, while Mom's expression cycled rapidly between disbelief and disappointment. Rachel simply stared as though encountering a version of her brother she didn't recognize. Additionally, I continued maintaining professional composure. I'm willing to provide a one-time contribution toward first month's rent and security deposit for appropriate housing paid directly to the landlord, not as cash. This assistance comes with specific conditions. I outlined these conditions without apology or defensiveness. Harold would need to attend gambling, addiction counseling, and secure employment within 60 days. Mom would need to participate in financial literacy training and contribute through part-time work appropriate for her abilities. Most importantly, all adult family members would commit to family therapy to address the patterns that had led to both their current crisis and our estrangement. This approach offers sustainable recovery rather than temporary shelter, I concluded. It addresses root causes rather than symptoms. The silence that followed felt weightier than any argument could have been. Harold was the first to respond, his face flushing with indignation. "So you're refusing to help your own mother? After everything she sacrificed for you?" His volume increased with each word, drawing glances from nearby diners. "I'm offering help that promotes healing and independence," I corrected calmly. "Not dependence or enabling." Mom's eyes filled with tears, a familiar tactic that once would have immediately compromised my resolve. "We just need a little time to get back on our feet," she pleaded. "Why are you being so cold?" "This isn't coldness," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "It's clarity about what genuine support looks like. 3 years ago, when I was recovering from back surgery, I needed temporary assistance. Instead, I was told to handle my problems independently and learn financial responsibility. I spent 3 nights sleeping in my car with a surgical incision that hadn't fully healed. The explicit reference to their abandonment created visible discomfort. Rachel looked down at her plate while Mom glanced away. Only Harold attempted justification. "That was different," he insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. "Yes, it was," I agreed. "I had a medical emergency beyond my control and a clear recovery timeline. My request was modest and temporary. The current situation stems from choices made repeatedly over time with warning signs that were ignored." I closed the folder and slid it toward them. "My offer stands. Sustainable help with conditions that promote genuine recovery, not a quick fix that perpetuates harmful patterns." The conversation deteriorated as expected. Harold stormed out after calling me ungrateful. Mom alternated between tears and guilt tactics about potentially becoming homeless. Rachel made a final appeal based on family obligation before joining Timothy in a tense departure. I remained seated, finishing my meal with deliberate calm, despite the emotional turbulence beneath the surface. This confrontation represented something profound, not vindictive payback, but the establishment of boundaries based on self-respect and genuine care rather than exploitation. The drive home that evening felt symbolic of my journey, moving forward with clear direction rather than circling back to familiar but destructive patterns. When I arrived, Audrey was waiting on the porch, swing her presence a reminder of what healthy love looked like. "How did it go?" she asked as I sat beside her. "Exactly as expected," I replied, feeling surprisingly peaceful despite the confrontation. They wanted the Marcus who would sacrifice everything without question. They met the Marcus who offers help that actually helps. The following weeks brought predictable emotional fallout. Mom left tearful voicemails about sleeping on Rachel's sofa. Harold sent angry texts accusing me of abandoning family. Rachel's messages oscillated between guilt tactics and grudging acknowledgement that their expectations might have been unreasonable. I responded, consistently reiterating my offer of structured assistance with accountability measures. For nearly a month, this offer was rejected as insulting and controlling. Then, as Rachel's pregnancy progressed and tension in her household mounted, the first sign of change appeared. "Timothy and I have been talking," her message began. We think the family counseling might actually help regardless of the housing situation. Would that offer still stand separately from the other conditions? This opening, however, small, marked the beginning of a gradual shift. Within 2 months, Mom had reluctantly agreed to the full program, including finding an apartment they could afford with modest assistance. Harold resisted longest, but eventually enrolled in gambling addiction counseling after Rachel made it clear he couldn't continue staying in her home without addressing his problems. The family therapy sessions were initially uncomfortable, with old defensiveness and blame emerging in predictable patterns. The skilled therapist gently but firmly redirected these dynamics, creating space for authentic communication about expectations, boundaries, and reciprocal respect. Progress came in small, incremental steps. Mom found part-time work at a local florist, discovering genuine enjoyment in arranging flowers. Harold's journey proved more challenging, with relapses in his gambling recovery, but the structure of the program provided accountability he had previously lacked. Rachel and Timothy strengthened their marriage through counseling, preparing more consciously for parenthood. 6 months after our restaurant confrontation, family interactions had evolved into cautious but more authentic connections. Mom called occasionally with updates on her life rather than requests or complaints. These conversations remained brief, but lacked the manipulation that had previously characterized our communication. The most significant moment of healing came unexpectedly 3 weeks before my wedding to Audrey. Rachel, now visibly pregnant, asked to meet for coffee without Timothy or our parents. Across the cafe table, she struggled to maintain eye contact as she spoke. "I've been thinking about your back surgery," she began hesitantly. "About how I responded when you needed help." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "The therapist asked us to identify patterns of taking without giving, and that memory kept surfacing." Her apology wasn't perfect or complete, but its sincerity marked a fundamental shift in our relationship. For perhaps the first time, Rachel saw me as a person with needs and boundaries, rather than a resource to be utilized. This recognition, however, belated, opened possibility for genuine connection moving forward. Our wedding day arrived with cautious optimism about family relationships. Mom, Harold, Rachel, and Timothy attended as guests rather than central figures, a distinction that would have been unimaginable years earlier. They respected our wishes regarding photographs, seating arrangements, and speeches, demonstrating newfound awareness of boundaries. The most poignant moment came during the reception when Walter, who had offered shelter when my family wouldn't, gave a toast celebrating not just our marriage but my personal journey. "I've watched Marcus rebuild himself from foundation to rooftop," he said, raising his glass. "His capacity for growth without bitterness is his greatest strength." Mom's eyes met mine across the room, as Walter spoke, her expression suggesting recognition of what had been lost and what might still be salvaged. Not the old dynamic of sacrifice and extraction, but something healthier built on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries. In the years since, our family relationships have continued evolving. Rachel's daughter, my niece Emma, knows me as Uncle Marcus, who visits occasionally rather than the unlimited resource her grandparents once assumed I would be. Mom has developed interests and community connections independent of her identity as mother. Harold's recovery continues with occasional setbacks but overall progress. The most valuable lesson from this journey has been understanding that helping others requires empowering them, not enabling destructive patterns. True compassion sometimes means refusing to participate in systems that harm all involved. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're essential components of healthy relationships. Building my business taught me that sustainable growth requires solid foundations and balanced exchange. The same principles apply to personal relationships. My family expected endless withdrawal from an account with no deposits, an approach that inevitably leads to bankruptcy, financial or emotional. The decisive action that flipped the script wasn't dramatic confrontation or vindictive punishment. It was simply establishing healthy boundaries while offering constructive paths forward, treating others as capable adults responsible for their choices, rather than dependents entitled to unlimited support. Today, as Audrey and I prepare to welcome our first child, I'm committed to creating family patterns based on mutual respect rather than obligation. The cycle of sacrifice and resentment ends with me. Our child will learn that love doesn't require self-destruction, that helping others means supporting their growth rather than enabling their dependence. What's your experience with family boundaries? Have you ever had to choose between self-respect and family expectations? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about navigating challenging relationships. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is define what healthy love looks like for you. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength in your own journey toward balanced relationships.